welcome back to the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Christian Bacassa. This week we've got Dan Hoffman on the line. Dan was a former guide in in Alaska, and actually the chief of police in Fairbanks. In fact, you started fishing as a kid in Colorado, transitioned to Alaska, college, you did some guiding, et cetera, and some really cool lodges like the Kulik Lodge, et cetera. But you fished all around the Fairbanks area, Katmai, et cetera. And you reached out to me and said, hey, I'd like to get on the show and kind of share my story. And I thought it was just great. Number one, you wrote a book. It was kind of like an autobiography called The Fly Fisherman's Odyssey. And you had some things to share because what was really unique about you is even though you had a main career as a chief of police, you were an angler. And we thought it would be a great conversation to have around transitioning from that kind of guiding scenario into maybe a potential future career. And we had some ideas around that. So we're going to talk about the transitioning out of guiding. You can't row a boat forever. Sometimes you want to stop early. And then the other aspect is our tip at the end of the show. And we're going to talk about how we can help you figure out how to get to Alaska. You don't want to miss it because Alaska is absolutely amazing and you can do it. So hang in there till the end to hear that tip. In the meantime, go visit us on the website, www.ffipodcast.com. And YouTube, same scenario, Fly Fishing Insider Podcast on YouTube. So Dan, welcome to the show, man. It's really great to have you on. Tell us a little bit about your career and how you got into the book writing, et cetera, and we'll start going from there.
Okay, sounds good, Christian. Thanks very much for having me. As you mentioned in the intro, as a kid, I grew up in the mountains of Colorado. And I was extremely fortunate that both my mom and my dad are both exceptional stream fishermen. And so being raised as a fisherman really, I guess, contributed to just about every aspect of my life. When I was 12 years old, my dad moved us up to Alaska. We actually lived down on the coast in Valdez for a couple of years, then moved on into Anchorage. I went to high school in Anchorage, went to university up in Fairbanks. But I've been an avid fisherman throughout my life, and as my life went on, as I transitioned, I was a fishing guide, as you mentioned, in Bristol Bay when I was in college. I looking at the landscape, I thought, boy, I love it down here. I love the fishing, but I thought, I don't know that I'll be able to hang in there and make a full-time career of this, probably like a lot of seasonal guides. So I ended up, again, through my university, I got my undergrad in wildlife biology, but then I transferred in to the enforcement aspect of things and ended up at the Fairbanks Police Department and did a full 20-year career there, retiring as chief of police. I then went into the industrial corporate side of risk management and safety for another decade or so. But it was really through all this time and, fishing in my off time whenever I had a chance, I really started to realize how my kind of orientation as a fly fisherman really informed almost every situation in my life, how I tended to look at things, how I tended to approach things. And all that stuff was really kind of muddling around in my head for several years. And so when we hit that first pandemic winter, and I think it was the winter of 2020 or 2021, we were pretty locked down up here in Alaska. We couldn't fly outside, couldn't go down to the normal tropical places, that my wife and I like to go for vacations. So I thought if there's ever a time to buckle down and write a book, it's going to be this winter when I know I'm going to be stuck in Fairbanks all through the entire winter. So I got the book done. It's called An Alaska Fly Fisher's Odyssey. And as you mentioned, it's for the most part an autobiography about my development as a fly fisher throughout my life. But to me, kind of more importantly, are those philosophical chapters that are kind of interspersed throughout, where again, I really started to explore the relationship between fly fishing and the way that we approach, relationships, the way that we approach team building, the way we approach dealing with new situations or challenges. To me, that stuff just is all quite fascinating.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, I kind of co-authored a book you've worked with John Childress
Yes.
during COVID as well. And I think a lot of us kind of took that avenue of like, well, we got lots of time. What am I going to do here? um, but it was an interesting time. And oddly enough, that was my first trip to Alaska was during COVID. I actually went up with a friend. We fished the Knack Knack and had a great time. We actually got to go to, what's the name of the falls up there on the Knack Knack, or
Brooks Falls.
up on the Brooks Falls.
Yeah.
And there were, I think, a total of 8 of us, including the guides and the Forest Service within the park. It was absolutely amazing. I had no idea until my partner said, no, you don't realize that platform up there usually has like 40 to 50 people with, thousands of dollars worth of lenses on it. So
yeah.
we were quite happy with being able to fish all over the place and really only have to worry about the birds or the bears, not people. So it was really cool, man. What an experience.
Oh yeah.
I kind of got off subject there telling you my story, but what I loved about yours is it did follow along with what I experienced as too. My book was called Fly Fishing for Leadership. And I had leaders tell their story of what they learned in fly fishing, how they applied it. But yours is very much the same of what you learned and how you applied it. And so I thought today's subject would be perfect, right? There's a lot of guides out there that are going, what am I going to do next? I don't know if I want to row a boat forever. I don't know if I want to be a guide forever, or I want to supplement my income. And you did something that was really special. And I've started to do that as well. And that's some public speaking.
Sure.
I think that's one avenue, but there's plenty of avenues, right, that you can go on. And the leverage of the information that you get and the people that you meet, et cetera, is, I think, a way to do that. So talk a little bit about how you found that transition and went after it and how that's kind of moved you going forward.
Yeah, it's really been, I guess you'd say, kind of an organic process. And I think everybody, I guess, kind of has to follow along their own path. But I guess what I would say, particularly as a career law enforcement officer as well, I actually deal and have dealt a lot with the same topic of people being in that career field and then looking to transition out into something else. And whether it being a police officer or a fishing guide or whatever it is. And I guess for me, one of the first, I guess, big challenges or potential problem areas that I've seen is I think people really tend to sell themselves short. People tend to put themselves into a box and kind of label themselves and say, I'm just a fishing guide, or I'm just a cop, or I'm just a this, or I'm just a that. And in, I guess, some of the explorations that I followed, particularly through writing my book and exploring, the transitions, like you say, from fly fishing to business or from law enforcement into the corporate side of things or whatever it may be, I found that if you look for it and if you pay attention, and particularly if you consciously are willing to kind of go in and really start dissecting things, you can find commonalities and you find these areas of pertinence and areas of transferability where let's say, if you're a career fishing guide, there's probably a lot of very special qualities that you have all wrapped up
That's
within
right.
you that make you that good guide. And rather instead not thinking, oh, I'm just a fishing guide, stop and give yourself some credit and really stop and think and do some analysis. Well, what is it that makes me such a great guide? Well, I have the ability to quickly get to know somebody and really connect with them on a personal level to where they'll trust me and follow my advice. I have the ability to go up to a stream that maybe I haven't fished in 3 or 4 months, but I have that ability to read the water and take in all this different information and quickly synthesize a game plan that I can put together and deliver for my clients. I have logistical strengths. I have scheduling strengths. I have the self-discipline to do the bookings and the bookwork and everything else associated with my business. Again, there's just so many different things that people usually have wrapped up within themselves, where I think they often maybe don't stop for one and appreciate what they've accomplished and what they've done, but two, where they might not realize, okay, how can all these special attributes and skills that I've put together over a lifetime, how could those then transfer over into something else? And I think that's
Hmm.
really the key, is looking for those areas of transferability and then capitalizing on them.
Yeah. Yeah. And those are great points. I mean, really, you think about it. One, you're a business owner and an entrepreneur. Two, like you said, I can have conversations. If I'm a good guide, man, I can relate to people, have conversations, understand them. I'm an inquisitive person by nature, probably, right? And part of that being inquisitive is being a guide, right? In the fishing side. Well, what questions am I asking myself in order to be successful that day? Right.
Right.
And then what are the problem solving aspects that I'm utilizing? What's the methodology that I'm utilizing? How are those things transferable to other roles? Right. Maybe I want to be an advisor to another fly fishing organization, to a shop, to a lodge, et cetera. Those are very, easy transitions. Maybe I want to go outside of that, but I have former experience in XYZ space, but I want to apply this to it, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's really cool to allow. Hey, look, there's a lot of guides these days. Man, they're like digital masterpieces, right? They figured it
Yeah.
all out, like how to use the systems together, et cetera, et cetera. Go advise somebody else on that. Really cool stuff. I think you're absolutely right. Some people, they underestimate their ability because, and we all do that, right? You get stuck in those sects, and
Yeah.
it's like, well, this is what I'm for. But if you can kind of bend that and apply it elsewhere, man, what a success area you can find. So you did this with the speaking. Talk a little bit about, maybe some of your fears and some of your aspirations when you were going through that.
Uh, yeah, it's been an interesting process, and kind of an interesting journey, because again, I tend to be a very kind of organized, outline kind of guy, and I don't usually embark on about anything with the kind of a seat of my pants approach. It's always like, well, I'm going to do this, and that should lead to that, and that'll set up this, which I can then build into this.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
for me, everything definitely had a strategy. And really, when I was getting ready to retire from my second career, again in kind of that industrial risk management space, I kind of started out with the end thought of, what is my ideal? What is it that in retirement that I would really love to be able to do and spend my time more than anything else? And I thought, well, in a perfect world, I would be out at remote fishing lodges, maybe hosting leadership retreats or team building retreats, just,
Hmm.
getting to meet new people, sharing a lot of this kind of knowledge and transferability that we've talked about, and helping others to kind of follow along the same kind of path. And to
Hmm.
do that again in these remote fly fishing lodges, where I would obviously be getting to spend a fair amount of time fly fishing as well, hopefully on somebody else's nickel. That to me would be the ideal, right? And so then you back up from that, and the first question I had to objectively ask myself is, well, if I'm some Fortune 500 executive that wants to go out on a leadership retreat to some remote lodge, why do I want to listen to this schmuck? Who's this guy? And so
Yeah.
so I thought, well, first and foremost, I have to position myself to be I guess, a bona fide person that somebody would want to maybe listen to. And so that was really one of the main impetuses of writing my book and getting that out there, and then using that in conjunction with my consulting business to start doing more corporate speaking and really kind of flesh out and develop these concepts. Because as I've done that, and as I start speaking to more and more groups and more businesses, and using those to promote my book, while I use my book to promote those services, everything kind of
Hmm.
feeds into each other. um, I'm very happy to say that that is now kind of setting up that space to where now, as you mentioned, I'm working with John Childress. We're working on putting together a curriculum for those type of leadership retreats, where we can bring people out and really talk about the transferability and the principles of fly fishing as it applies to business, as it applies to
Yeah.
leadership, as it applies to team building. And so again, that's been kind of my process, but yeah, I think there's probably infinite variables and varieties to that, given anybody, what you're currently doing, and then looking at what you want to do and figuring out how to transition from one area to the next.
Yeah. You know, You just discussed about like identifying what my credentials are and
Right.
even building some of them. Do you have some tips for people who maybe are in the guide area right now of, hey, this is how you look at yourself and, the skills that you have and how you might build some of those credentials?
Absolutely. I think that first and foremost, we've already talked about, obviously not selling yourself short. And many of these guides do have, I would say, an exceptional combination of attributes that are going to serve them well no matter what they get into. But having said that, you could also probably say that, there's a bajillion guides out there, and a lot of people might say, oh, you've seen one fishing guide, you've seen them all. So I would say that, especially if you're starting to look to transition into something else, you may need to figure out what are you going to do, or what active steps are you going to take to maybe set yourself apart a little bit, or perhaps elevate
Mm-hmm.
yourself a bit in certain areas. And whether that be going out and getting some continuing education, maybe you want to go back to, if you have a local community college in your area, maybe you can go back to school and get some occupational certificates in certain areas that
Mm-hmm.
might
Yep.
really facilitate you getting in front of certain types of businesses. For instance, as I said, when I transitioned out of law enforcement, I went into that industrial safety and risk management. That actually opened up a huge uh, area of development for me in working with
Mm-hmm.
insurance companies and putting together contingency plans and doing all these kind of things that now when I go into any type of business, um, I kind of have there's always a bit of, I guess, gravitas or mystique or whatever with being able to say, yes, I retired as a chief of police, because people automatically assume, okay, well, there was obviously, leadership there. There was,
Yep.
community leadership there. There was agency development there. But then when I can combine that with the insurance safety risk analysis part of my career, it puts together kind of a unique skill set that I can then market to businesses as a consultant and say, these are all things I'm experienced at. So again, I would say anybody looking to transition from one area into another, you kind of have to look forward a little bit and think about who are you going to want to approach, and what kind of skills or certifications or whatever are those people going to perhaps be looking for, and
Yep.
then go out and actively seek to get some of those things.
Yeah. And I think some of the ways that you could do that, right? Um, Find like, hey, where are my niche areas? Where are my skill sets really lying? Is two things I can think of right away is if you have a business and you have reviews, go read your reviews.
Yeah.
Look for things that people are repeating about you and highlighting. Those are probably your strengths. The other one is just, think back through, hey, of all the people I guided, you probably had conversations around their career,
Mm-hmm.
right? And their business. Maybe ask yourself, like, who you related to and why. And that might be applicable. And then don't be afraid to reach back out to those people. I mean,
Absolutely.
most people love their guide, right?
Yeah.
And to get a phone call from a guide of like, hey, I was really looking to bend your ear a little bit. Could you help me out? This is what I'm trying to think. And I thought of you. And gosh, you just never know what you're going to, end up having a conversation around and how those people would be willing to help you. There's one thing about fly fishing that I found is the propensity to get help from somebody else who's an angler is extremely, extremely high.
Yeah.
And there's just that like-mindedness of understanding and, willingness to work and, hey, let me help you out, you know?
Absolutely. And I think especially when you talk about, as a guide, for instance, reaching out maybe to former clients, one, I can tell you that I think the relationship that almost is immediately established between a guide and a client, especially in the fly fishing space, I think is pretty special. And so I think that any client, like you say, that gets that phone call is, one, going to be immediately flattered and immediately humbled even a little bit, that, wow, my guide is now looking to me maybe for some guidance.
Right,
And
right,
so, like
right.
you say, I think most, 99% of the time, I'd be shocked if those people weren't falling all over themselves to end up being effective mentors to help folks get it through those career transitions.
And I would agree because you kind of start out like this, right? Where you're the guide, you're the authoritarian. And then through that conversation, it starts to go like this. And
Yeah.
they're like, oh, now I am. I can help you.
Yeah,
There's just a symbiotic relationship there that I think is really great and satisfying as a person, right? I think we all naturally want to help people,
sure.
right? In fact, when you go through, I was in tech sales for years, and when you go through tech sales training, they always say, ask them, can you give me some help? Because people naturally want to help people. If you see an accident,
Yeah,
what's your natural response is to help, right?
sure.
It's not to run and hide and avoid, it's to help. So, utilizing that aspect of various people and leveraging the relationships that you've created over the years, I think can be really strong.
Absolutely.
So you made the transition. You started to do things. Where did you start to see maybe some hiccups or questions in your process of, ooh, I never thought of that. That's a little harder than I had expected, but I can solve it.
Yeah, I think for me, probably one of the biggest challenge areas that I have, and frankly will probably continue to have, and you're actually probably a great guy to talk to about this because you have, I guess, shown the expertise of figuring out so much of the technology and the social media avenues that are available out there now. And starting your
Mm-hmm.
podcast, doing that type of marketing, putting all that kind of stuff together. Um, for me, I'm not that old, okay, but I saw a meme the other day that was something like, be patient with me. I was born in the 1900s, and that's really sometimes sometimes how I'm feeling. And I have a lot of friends that are in the marketing space and things like that. And whenever I go and talk to them, again, often seeking out advice, saying, "Hey, I'd really like to, try to get my speakers video out there to more people, or figure out how to really kickstart more of this part of the process." Invariably or almost immediately, I'm asked, "Well, are you on TikTok? Are you on Instagram? Are you doing this? Are you doing that?" And so many of those social media applications, the I don't know how to quite say this. The logical part of my brain tells me, yes, absolutely, I should be doing all these things
Hmm.
because that's going to likely further my business. But in reality, most of those things just aren't me. I'm not that guy. I'm not the guy that's going to
Yeah.
be a TikTok star. And frankly, it's like I don't have the mental energy and enthusiasm to start, I guess, putting myself through that daily regimen of, okay, I've got to do this many posts, and then I've got to create this many TikTok videos, and then I've got to do this many Instagram whatevers. That's just not me. And so
Yeah.
that's probably my biggest continuing struggle, is figuring out how do I effectively get my message out there, continue to grow my consultancy and my business without becoming a slave to the whole, kind of social media
Social
landscape
world.
that's out
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
Yeah. It's tough. It's a tough landscape to navigate and understand. And having been in marketing for years, I would recommend two things. One is once you narrow it down, really try to pick just one platform
Mhm.
to start with until you've mastered it. The other is before you even pick your platform, identify who your customer is and where they're at.
Yeah.
Um, you know, as an anglers may hang out on Instagram, but executive anglers that will be buying an executive retreat, they probably
Mhm.
hang out on LinkedIn. So for me,
Right.
I would focus on LinkedIn. That's where the
Yeah.
executive anglers are, right?
Yeah.
Those are the people that are going to be buying or purchasing the experience. But if
Right.
I'm a guide, somebody on Instagram may be the ticket. TikTok is fantastic, but the demographics a little bit lower. So what am
Sure.
I trying to do on TikTok? TikTok, I might be able to try to build a pipeline of younger people that buy guiding services that are facilitated by mom and dad, but I'm getting in there early and I'm building my next line of business because I already have a pretty good big business, but I know some of those guys are going to kind of start to fall off, etc.
Sure. Sure.
So there's, I think, a bunch of different avenues to kind of play with, but
Mhm.
yeah, it can be a pretty tough one to explore. It's not easy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's do this. We talked a bit about the career. I think we covered that pretty good in that transition phase. Let's
Sure.
talk a little bit about your fishing. You're an angler
Absolutely.
at
That
heart.
that's what everybody wants to
Yeah,
talk about, right? Is fishing. That's why they're
you're
listening to you.
right, right, right. Right. Tell us a little bit about the fishing up in and around your area. I know you're very fond of Bristol Bay area. Why is it so amazing, and why should people really think about getting there?
Yeah, amazing doesn't even really begin to cover it. Again, I spent several seasons out there as a younger man, and I've since been able to get back out there quite a few bit more times. But there are so many areas, so many specific drainages out there that are just very unspoiled. There's obviously no road access out there to almost any of these areas. There's a very small little bit of roads around Dillingham and King Salmon and things like that. But almost all of the areas that you're going to be flying into to go out there to fish, whether it be the Kulik, the Alagnac, the Branch, the Moraine, Funnel, Gibraltar, all these different drainages out there. The only way you can get in there is to fly in, and some of those drainages, the only way you can even fly in is to fly to a nearby lake and then do a fair hike to get over to the drainage that you want to fish. But once you're there, it's such a magical landscape. Most of those drainages, you've got that Bristol Bay sockeye salmon fishery, as well as you've got the silver run, the king run, the pink run, and everything else. But really, that sockeye fishery, more than anything else, is just flooding and plugging all of these rivers and streams up with these massive runs of sockeye salmon, and that of course brings in the brown bears, by the dozens.
Yeah.
uh, and for anybody who hasn't spent any amount of time fishing in and around a good population of brown bears, you're really missing out. There's been days where I frankly felt like setting my rod down just to watch the bears because they're just so
Yeah.
cool to watch. And the nice thing about it, because a lot of folks will be like, "Oh my God, that sounds so scary." And bears, obviously can be scary under certain circumstances. But for the most part, what I always tell people is that once the salmon are in any given stream, that stream is now pretty much a 24/7 self-service buffet where all the bear
Yes.
has to do is wade out, catch a fish, go back into the brush, eat it, wade back out, catch another fish, go back into the brush, eat it. And that's all
Hmm.
they're doing. They're just constantly and if you look at I think the National Park Service out of Brooks, they have their fat bear contest every year now on social media where they show these bears over the course of the season just getting massive and massive.
Bigger, bigger.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and then people vote for the fattest bear or whatever. But again, as long as you're somewhat knowledgeable of bear behavior and as long as you basically stay out of their way so that they can get in, get their fish, and get back out, they frankly could care less about people. And
That's
so,
exactly it.
yeah, and so there were a few times. I remember one of the very last trips I ever took as a guide out at Kulik. We wanted to fly in and fish Funnel, which is a tributary up in the upper battle drainages. And I remember flying in, and we were circling around. There was about a mile long stretch of this stream that we like to hike into and fish. Well, as we circled the plane around and kind of scoping this out, I think we counted 43 brown bears within that 1 mile stretch. And at that
Yeah.
point, we were like, we need to go somewhere else. Not because it would be dangerous so much as that you just really wouldn't be able to fish at all. You'd get
Yeah.
into
You're
the
too
stream.
close all the
Yeah,
time. Yeah.
you'd get into a stream. Here comes a bear, so you get out. You let them go by. You'd get into the stream. Oh, here comes another one. You'd get out. You'd spend all your time dodging bears, and you really wouldn't get to fish. So
Yeah.
you can hit those circumstances from time to time. The last time I was out at the Kulik, there were more bears, and this was just year before last. There were more bears that fall in the Kulik River than I had ever seen on the Kulik 20, 30 years ago when I was guiding. I mean,
Yeah.
it's the number, some of the numbers out there around Brooks, Kulik, and some of these other major drainages. The numbers seem to be getting almost silly. I mean, to the number of bears that
Yeah.
can be in these concentrated stretches of stream. But having said that,
Mm,
the fishing is unbelievable,
amazing.
especially yeah, and especially I would say if you were one of those guys or gals that would be like, okay, I can only go up there once. I'm only going to have this one lifetime trip. I would say you really want a time to be there during the actual egg drop when those salmon are actively
Yep.
spawning and dropping eggs because there you're fishing nothing but egg patterns and beads, but the
It's
level.
amazing fishing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost what there are times I would actually call it stupid fishing, because it's like you'd have to be really stupid not to be able to just catch, fish after fish after fish. It's quite
Yeah.
amazing.
It doesn't become a numbers game at that point. It
Oh
becomes
no,
um, the fish game, in my opinion.
absolutely.
And that, just so you guys know, that's the September timeline is what
Yeah.
you're looking at for that egg drop. But I'll give my example. I fished Kulik through the Katmai Trophy Lodge. We did a fly
Mm,
out to Kulik, and you mentioned the bears. When we were leaving Kulik, my partner and I and the guide were walking, and we were talking about the bears, and we stopped and we counted the number of bears within our eyesight, and it was over 23 bears.
yeah, I believe it.
So to give you an idea, there were side streams I remember walking down, and it looked like um, an apocalypse of salmon. There were just salmon carcasses everywhere. But the fishing was amazing in this little side stream. It was just incredible. And what was so cool about the fishing I found at Kulik was there. Number one, you can see the salmon. Number two, you can see the rainbow trout.
Yeah,
And you then become, after you catch a few and the excitement starts to settle in, you start to go, there's some more rainbow trout. Oh, that's the one I want.
yeah,
And then your casting becomes far more accurate. You can actually at times see your bead and see the eat. It's like tight line nymphing
yeah.
visually.
Mhm.
And it's really incredible. And like you said, I have pictures of bears, not too far away. In the bear thing, I got used to it right away. Some others were still a little more nervous. What I found was something to think about for me was if I'm not startling and surprising a bear, they really don't want anything to do with me.
Yeah.
And I agree. There's so much salmon in the water, and it's so fun to watch them because they'll literally grab a salmon, crack open the head, like eat the brains and pull the skin off. That's like all the high fat content, and they'll just like chuck the rest, and then they'll go grab another one, and it's like really amazing to watch and just beautiful, beautiful creatures, and of course
Yes, they
everything
are.
else that goes with it, the scenery, et cetera, et cetera. So really, really cool. Let's
Yeah,
do this. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it is truly a magical place, and anybody that hasn't figured out a way to get out there needs to figure out how to get out there.
Yeah, and we'll talk about some ways to do that here in a bit.
Sure.
But you fished that area all throughout the year. So talk a little bit about some of the other maybe locations or fly outs that you've done for, like, say, dry fly fishing or mousing or things like that.
Yeah, that's and again, so while if I was a very wealthy person, I would probably, spend a lot of my time flying out to Southwest Alaska. But even for those of us who live up here in Alaska, it can be pretty spendy to get out there on a regular basis because of the flights and lodging and everything else. I'm very fortunate that right here where I live in Fairbanks, Alaska, I have a an exceptional dry fly fishery, for Arctic
Hmm.
grayling within an hour of my house, and it's some of the most beautiful dry fly water that you'd ever want to fish. For those who haven't fished for grayling before, they are an extraordinarily beautiful fish who are voracious surface feeders. And it's not uncommon at all for me to go up there and have a 50 to 100 fish day, fishing primarily dries. And the other thing
Right.
that's so cool is that,
And sizable, sorry, but sizable dries. It's not like you're fishing
oh
the
yeah,
little
yeah,
guys you can't see. These are like really nice sized dries that get eaten, like no sight issues, etc.
oh yeah, there's big. There's a lot of you're fishing in heavy spruce forest up there, so there are a lot of those great big black carpenter ants around everywhere. So fishing a big
Mm-hmm.
foam ant, fishing large elk hair caddises. I probably take 80-90% of my fish, up there on those larger dry patterns. But the other nice thing about fishing up there is it's been regulated as a catch and release fishery for a long time. So the average size of these grayling are getting quite large. I get a lot of grayling
Mm.
that are 1.5, 2 pounds. I mean, a good sized grayling. But what really makes it special is that I spend probably minimum 20 days a summer up there fishing, And for me to ever run into another angler on the stretches of stream that I hike in and fish is pretty rare. And if
Hmm.
these stretches of water with that kind of fishing anywhere down in Utah, Montana, Colorado, I think it'd be overrun. And the fact that there's
Yeah.
such little pressure up here really makes it something special.
Yeah, yeah. And grayling are tremendous fish to catch. They're really fun. I mean,
Yeah,
you catch one, and as soon as they throw that dorsal sail up, you could
yeah,
tell the different type of tug as they start to curve through the water and really like submarine travel your line. It's super fun, and like you said, ferocious eaters on top. It's so funny because their mouths are so small, right? Their
yeah,
mouths almost look like a whitefish, Rocky
yeah,
Mountain whitefish per se. But man, they just love that topwater eat.
yeah.
It's a great fish to catch.
Yeah, and you mentioned briefly you mentioned mousing and things like that. I've actually done a fair amount of fishing with deer hair shrews and small mice patterns up there, and it's amazing uh, how readily they'll go after those topwater shrews as well.
Yeah, even during the day, that's
Oh
a
yeah,
huge difference that we see down here is, I do a fair amount of mousing, but the majority of your success is late evening
mm,
and nighttime fishing. Whereas up there, you can get in the seasonal changes where, like you said, I think the mouse population is prevalent. The pressure isn't really high. They're in heavily wooded areas, and even during the day, man, you can have great mousing adventures.
oh yeah. That's one of the great things about grayling fishing is again having grown up as a kid in Colorado, probably very similar to a lot of your experiences in Utah. There again, a hot, sunny midday, you know, fish seem to be really spooky and kind of hard to get. Grayling are the exact opposite up here. You know, that low, clear
Hmm.
water on a hot, sunny day, it seems like they're just keying into the surface. And that's some of the best fishing days I've had up here has been when it's, 80, 85 degrees, hot, sunny weather, and just grayling going nuts for anything on the surface.
Yeah, a hot sunny day like that for us, we're like hopper dropper praying for an
Yeah,
underwater eat, right?
yeah,
Too cool, too cool. Let's do this. Let's talk a little bit about the topic of figuring out how to get to Alaska.
sure.
A lot of people talk about it or have that dream or aspiration of someday I want to go to Alaska and I want to fish. And let's give them some ideas. How do you actually do that? Because we've talked about, the quality of Alaska, the beauty, et cetera, et cetera. But let's give them some ideas. So go ahead. Why don't you fire off a handful of ideas that you have on potentially squirreling away money or picking a lodge, et cetera?
Sure. I'd say first and foremost, recognize that there are what I would call several tiers of fishing and the fishing experience that you can have in Alaska. There is certainly the ability for what I would call the do it yourselfer angler. I mean, you can easily plan on flying into Anchorage and maybe having rented a small motorhome. You can take that motorhome down to the Kenai Peninsula. You can fish, the Kenai River, the Anchor River, Quartz Creek, the Russian River, all those road-based drainages down there. You can drive up into the interior. You can fish all of the drainages, in and around Fairbanks and all along the rail belt there. Um, and so that's something that again on the overall expense side of things, you could actually do that fairly economically. Um,
Mm-hmm.
for the angler who maybe has I guess the next tier up would be the self outfitted more remote type of adventurer, where again, you can make your way, fly up to Anchorage, Fairbanks, wherever, and you can hire an outfitter to, say, drop you off out on a drainage with a raft and some gear, to do your own self guided float.
Right.
There's a fair number of fishing outfitters who do that, and again, now you're getting into some spendier territory, but still nothing like the full blown guided fly out lodge experience, which that would be
Mm-hmm.
your third avenue. I would say if you have the money, and especially if it's going to be like that once in a lifetime trip for you, by all means, look at a lodge like Kulik Lodge or any of those high end Bristol Bay lodges where you'll fly out, you'll stay at the lodge, you've got gourmet meals, all your gear's provided. They're flying you out from that lodge to different drainages every day, depending upon what you want to catch. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not cheap. There you're going to be spending upwards of, somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000 a day, depending upon the length of time you're out there. So again, that's the type of thing that you want to definitely save your money for. I guess one other thing, just had a thought pop into my head, but boom, there it's gone. So I'll throw it back to
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, and I think those are great. That's a great way to describe it, right? You have multiple tiers, and there's some tiers in between there probably that you can explore as well. I think what I would say is whatever tier you're defining, say you're doing a do-it-yourselfer or etc., go do some research online. It's really
Absolutely.
easy. Like you said, if I want to go to Fairbanks and do my own fishing, like you can call local shops, you can look online. There's a plethora of advice on how to do it on your own. Sometimes that can be the largest obstacle. I don't have the time to go do that, right?
Yeah.
So, if that's the case, then you might have to do some of those other things. So each one of them has its own arena. Listen to things like podcasts, people that you trust where they can offer locations or advice on certain areas to go.
Yeah.
I
And
think
that
that's a big one.
actually, yeah. And the information that you just shared that prompted or caused me to recall the thought that had slipped my mind. And that was also for the prospective angler looking to come up here to also really pay attention to the seasonality of the drainages up here and for the particular species. Unlike many, there's a lot of places like where I grew up down in Colorado. If there's a stream, there's going to be trout in that stream pretty much all the time. There are a lot of
Yes,
streams. There's a lot of streams and drainages up here where there may be only a 2-week window out of the entire year where big rainbows are moving up into that drainage, perhaps following the
that's right.
salmon that are spawning up there. And as soon as that egg drop is done, they're all backing back down into the big lakes or wherever.
Into the
And
lake or whatever.
yeah, and so you could find yourself on beautiful water, casting your flies, and there's nothing in there to be casting to. So
Yeah,
I would say to go along with what you're talking about, doing your online research, almost every lodge, even if you're not going to go stay at a particular lodge, feel free to log on to their website and look at their fishing calendars because just about every
mm-hmm.
lodge will have a calendar that says, this is the week if you want to target silvers. This is the week if you want to target kings. This is the week if you're looking for rainbows, and really pay attention to those things so that you're not coming up here, in early June wanting to try to catch spawning silver salmon because it ain't going to happen.
It's not going to happen,
Yeah,
right?
you have to know when the fish are going to be where.
Yeah. In fact, I talked about that on a show with James Johnson from the Katmai Trophy Lodge right on the Knack Knack.
Uh-huh.
And, we talked about the misnomers of a lot of people who go like, I want to go to Alaska and have this fishing. And they envision dry fly fishing, right?
Yeah,
And you're going, wait a minute. Depends on the year and location. So
yeah,
be cognizant of that and careful. And it's really simple. It's not as hard as you think. Call a lodge, call a shop, talk to them, ask about those experiences, find a location, go for it, and you'll
absolutely.
be happy. And I would say Alaska is such an amazing place. It's hard to go wrong, guys. So
Yeah,
keep that in mind, right? It really is. It's hard to go wrong. Um, okay, now we kind of have an understanding of like, hey, you're starting to pick out and choose an area. So now you choose an area, you kind of have a budget set, etc. How do we obtain that budget? What are some of the tips and tricks that you have there? Because you've probably seen a lot of people do once in a lifetime. You travel a lot. I travel a lot. Let's give the listener some tips on. Hey, here's some ways to save for budget.
yeah. And I'm always quick to point out to people I was raised by wonderful parents, but notoriously cheap parents, and I think that's kind of stuck with. I'm just by nature a pretty frugal guy, and so especially when I start looking at things that I think might be outside of my normal means or whatever, I'm usually very quick to try to come up with strategies. How am I going to pull together some extra funds, so that this doesn't hurt so bad, so to speak? Because frankly, once you're out in this wonderful, amazing place, having that trip of a lifetime, the last thing you want, I think, is that voice in the back of your head constantly saying, "Do you realize how much this is costing me?" That's you should be over it by
Right.
that point. So what?
That's right.
I guess what I would say is first and foremost is once you've made that decision that hey, I'm going to go out to Southwest Alaska, or hey, I'm going to drive up in interior Alaska and budget for my own, road-based fishing, whatever it is you're doing, be realistic and look at the expenses and then start doing whatever you need to do, even if it's on a small periodic, monthly basis to start squirreling away those extra funds and really have that kind of dedicated fishing account that's off limits for everything else. And,
Hmm.
luckily, I think there's a lot of opportunities now, maybe more so than ever has been before, for people to easily get little side gigs. Everybody
Hmm.
can sign their vehicle up with Uber and go out there and do some Uber and Lyft driving. Everybody can,
That's right.
you know, there's just a lot of things that you can look around and figure out. Oh, here's some extra I can do. You might have a thing at your company where it's like periodically they may be offering, some additional overtime for people willing to step in and do different jobs, and
Hmm.
go to your boss and say, okay, I'll sign up for an extra 2 of these slots a month because I'm going to be taking that money and putting it in my dedicated, fishing piggy bank. But
Yep.
like I was talking with you before the show, just I would tell anybody, whatever you need to do, figure out how to do it and start squirreling that money away because
Yeah.
once you get up here, you'll be so glad that you did.
Yes. Yeah. You won't regret it at all.
No.
And I'm on the same boat as you. So, my methods or advice would be, I work with an investment company, Edward Jones. I have an account set up that's my vacation account, and I pull monthly a certain amount of money into that. And it doesn't have to be a lot. It could be $5, it could be $100, whatever it is. But I can even tell a timeline as to when I'm ready for my next trip based upon budget. Other areas, like you said, go pick up an extra shift. Um, go do an odd job. Maybe um, I cut grass at one location, you know, a couple times a month. That's it.
Yeah.
Have an extra job, like you said, Uber. I thought that's a great example. Like, I live in Park City, and the Sundance Film Festival comes here. I could go once a year for a week and just grind out Uber drives for the week and like do really well, right?
Yeah.
I think those are all, just fantastic ideas to, whatever it takes. If you have that goal in mind, like, just work towards it, man. You can get there. It's really not as much as you think. It'll come together so much faster, and then go just enjoy yourself, because it's, I don't know how to describe it, but other than it's absolutely amazing. I can remember my first time flying out over the tundra and just being in awe of, like, wow, this place is just so big and desolate, and there's so much life and amazement, and it's everything you think of and more. I think
Yeah. It's heaven on earth.
Alaska, it just, yeah, it's a really, really cool zone. Well, hey, Dan, I appreciate you having on or being on the show and having us share with you your story and your advice. Um, Anything you want to leave the group with?
Just, I think kind of, I guess, a restatement of what we were just talking about. Just, figure out what you need to do to get up here and then get out there and do it because, you know, it, you know, things, when you look at the whole kind of worldwide, evolution of environments and, there's always threats of industrialization and everything else. And, you know, most places, things aren't going to get any better than they already are. So I always tell,
Yeah,
suggest people get out there while there's still these amazing, wild, extraordinary places that you can experience. Get out there and experience them while you can.
great advice. Great advice, Dan. Hey, guys, really great having you guys on the show, too. We'll see you next week, and have a good one.
All right, thanks.